This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. What went so wrong in the midterm elections, and what can Democrats do about it? Party strategist Celinda Lake says, get an economic message. As the nation celebrates Veterans Day, former Ambassador and Undersecretary of State Robert Hormats says foreign policy has to be bipartisan. And Bill Press talks with Zeke Miller of Time magazine. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. The midterm elections did not produce the outcomes progressives worked for, but Democratic strategist Celinda Lake has some thoughts on how the party can recover the next time around. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Celinda Lake is one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, serving as tactician and senior advisor to the National Party committees, dozens of Democratic incumbents, and challengers at all levels of the electoral process. Celinda Lake, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you very much. It's delightful to be here.
And nice to talk to you as well. So, what do you make of the midterm election results? Did you see it coming down that way in advance?
Well, structurally, things were set up against us. We knew from the get-go that the Senate seats that were up were Senate seats that Romney had won for the most part. And that was already a structural disadvantage for us, just as in 2016, the Senate seats that are up are ones that Barack Obama won. So we're going to be in much better shape. We knew that there would be turnout problems. 34 million voters projected to drop off, 23 million of them ours. Turnout was even worse than predicted. It was lower than 2010, and it was lower among some key groups: women, younger voters, people of color, unmarried voters. But we knew we had that trouble. We also knew that the president's job performance numbers would make a big difference. And if his job performance numbers were 43% or below, there would be some real drag on the ticket. If it was above, then individual candidates could kind of establish their own profile. Except for one state, West Virginia, the Senate candidates who lost still did 9% better than Barack Obama did in their states, but there's just only so much tide you can overcome. So there were a lot of structural problems, the 6-year itch that we knew about. That said, I think the tide was beyond those structural problems, and it's certainly a real wake-up call for the Democrats.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything that surprised you in the elections in terms of results?
The two things that surprised me in terms of the results were, one, the magnitude, the margin. I mean, losing Arkansas by 19 points, having congressional races like the Leaf Fathers get so close, that was definitely a surprise. The second thing that surprised me is I thought anti-incumbency would factor into. So I did not think all of these Republican governors would be coming back, because I thought there was a little bit of a anti-incumbent as well as an anti-democratic feeling.
We're speaking with Celinda Lake, Democratic Party leading political strategist. What do the results indicate for the health of the Democratic Party and progressive values?
Well, I think that, first of all, the initiative showed that progressive values are in very good standing. I mean, one of the things that we saw is in state after state where voters could go directly and vote on policy, they voted for progressive and democratic policies. They voted to increase the minimum wage in 4 states, and in 2 states advisory measures for it. They voted for paid sick days. They voted for legalizing marijuana. They voted to protect pensions in Arizona. They voted against predatory lending. They voted to maintain same-day registration in Montana. I mean, we're not talking about winning these initiatives in Manhattan and L.A. We're talking about winning these initiatives in some very, very tough states for us. And in fact, the irony is these initiatives were winning quite strongly in states that were simultaneously defeating their Democratic senators. So I think progressive values and progressive issues are in good stead. I think what this warned us about is turnout, and we knew that problem already. 2016 will be in much, much more advantageous position in terms of turnout. And I think the number one warning here of the 2014 elections is we must, as Democrats, have an economic message. And we didn't have one. And by circumstance or by choice, the president did not talk much about the economy from May on, and we never win elections as Democrats unless we're ahead on the economy. On Election Day, we were even on the economy. Voters who chose the economy split their vote. That is a losing formula for Democrats.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's amazing to me is the message of, we're in much better economic standing today than we were 6 years ago under this president. Why not more of that? What kept people from kind of sounding that horn? Because, unemployment is better. Everything's better.
Well, I guess maybe, but not where real people live. And I guess my confusion about your question actually shows the problem with that posture. And not to be facetious here, but real people don't think they're better off. 73% of Americans think their kids will not be better off. That's the highest number it's ever been. We only have 22% of Americans who think that they are personally better off. The S&P index may be doing better, but real America is not. And it's not good enough. And really, there is a page, I think, to be taken here from President Clinton's playbook, which is, he said, I've created 1.2 million jobs, but that's not good enough. It's not good enough until you can those jobs pay well enough to raise a family. It's not good enough until you can count on that being a full-time job with benefits. And that's what we need. People think it's been 20 years since they've had a raise. And you know what? The economic data show they're right.
Yeah. Okay. How much of a role, if any, did voter suppression play?
Well, it's hard to say, and that's something we really need to understand. It certainly didn't help, and certainly the Republicans understood the disadvantage they were at. And also, while much of the voter suppression was thrown out in court, what was stopped is moving toward opening more voting. We need to be moving in the direction of expanding voting, not contracting it. So certainly we had trouble with turnout in African American and Latino communities. Unclear how much of that was voter suppression, lack of an economic message, lack of motivation, just drop off, but it certainly didn't help.
Mm-hmm. What do the results show specifically for any or perhaps all of the presumed presidential candidates in both parties?
Well, very different lessons. For the Democrats, what it shows is we need an economic message, and whatever candidate runs needs to articulate early on their economic vision and plan. And then we need to get out the vote. We need to get out younger voters, women, unmarried voters, people of color. And I think we'll be very advantaged in doing that in a presidential year, but we need to do that. In terms of the Republicans, I think their major lesson was they recruited a very different kind of candidate, and they were ruthless against their right-wing candidates. They had the moderates win their primaries. They cleaned out primaries. They shuffled candidates around. Ken Buck would not have won the U.S. Senate seat. Cory Gardner did, and they shifted races and put Ken Buck in the congressional seat. So they ran a very different caliber of candidate. Now they face a rip-roaring primary where the right-wing candidate may emerge. And they need to, that's something they need to guard against. They also elected candidates who were a lot more relatable than they had been in the past. You didn't have, 2014 we had Republican candidates ending on their campaigns on saying why I am not a witch and defining legitimate rape, so-called legitimate rape. That's not how they ended this campaign. And in fact, you had candidates change their position on choice, change their position on minimum wage when they found out they were out of the mainstream from voters. There is a real challenge on their side in terms of not electing royalty or right-wingers. And we'll see how that turns out.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking ahead, who do you think the Republican and Democratic presidential nominees will be?
Oh, I think our nominee will be Hillary Clinton. I certainly hope it will be.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea who they will nominate.
Mm-hmm.
I think their most dangerous candidate for us is one of these moderate Republican governors. But I think they're far more likely to have a real battle royal between the kind of moderate capitalist wing of the party, the Jeb Bushes, the Mitt Romneys, and the more right-wing branch of the party, the Rand Pauls, the Ted Cruzes, the Paul Ryans. So I have no idea how that sorts out.
The fact that I sort of feel the same way, that there's no clear-cut person ahead on the Republican side. Does that benefit Democrats because in that the Republican Party is still pretty fractured?
Yes, it certainly helps it. And if they have a bad, bruising primary, and if their candidates get driven right, and if they can't articulate a coherent economic policy because they're so busy fighting with each other. On the other hand, it does set up our candidate as a target for a longer period of time. So there are pluses and minuses to both.
Okay. Celinda Lake, one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Celinda, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Okay, thank you, and we will talk again soon. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Robert Hormats was Undersecretary of State to Hillary Clinton and a former ambassador. In this time of political polarization on the domestic front, he's urging that foreign policy remain bipartisan. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Silicon Valley, located somewhere between sensational and silly, has long been led by entrepreneurial billionaires with a surreal relationship to people in the normal workaday world. Thus, the tech geniuses who rule the rarefied silicon stratosphere not only hold some of the most insensitive and stupid beliefs, but occasionally utter them aloud. For example, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, recently gave an astonishing bit of advice to women working for high-tech firms. It's not good karma for women to ask for pay raises, he lectured. Instead, just trust corporate bosses to do the right thing, quote, knowing and having faith that the system will actually give you the right raises as you go along. Bizarrely, Nadella chose to cough up this completely clueless comment at a conference of women celebrating their role in the technology industry. Scorched immediately by media and public outrage, he tried to quell the firestorm by apologizing, then announcing that all Microsoft workers would henceforth receive, quote, expanded training on how to foster an inclusive culture in the workplace. Earth to Satya, it's not your employees who need expanded training, it's you. Group therapy aside, improving Microsoft's culture requires opening up a closed system, providing real steps to rectify the imbalances women face in an industry that's notoriously unfriendly to them. For starters, note that at present only 29% of Microsoft's employees are female, and that women hold only 17% of its high-paying engineering and executive positions. This is Jim Hightower saying, by the way, how did CEO Nadella get his $84 million a year pay package? I'm guessing he demanded it. Good karma be damned. For more information on Silicon Valley's female problem, connect with the advocacy group Ultraviolet at weareultraviolet.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Foreign policy is too important to be caught up in partisan politics, says former Undersecretary of State Robert Hormats. He also has some thoughts about what went wrong in Iraq. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Robert Hormats was Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment under Hillary Clinton and is currently Vice Chairman of the consulting firm Kissinger Associates. Robert Hormats, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, I'm very happy to be with you. Good morning.
And now, you served in top foreign policy positions under Presidents Nixon, Carter, Reagan, and Obama. You are now Vice Chairman of Kissinger Associates. So is foreign policy then something that ought to be immune from partisanship?
Yeah, foreign policy should be largely bipartisan. That doesn't mean that the parties don't have views, and obviously they do, and they debate those views vigorously. But in the end, if a country doesn't have a strong consensus behind its foreign policy, two things will happen. One, it won't have the support at home it needs, political or financial. And two, abroad, people will look at foreign policy as something that is sort of light switch diplomacy, where one administration gets in and dramatically changes policy compared to that of the previous administration, which creates a lot of uncertainty. So at least the fundamentals of foreign policy should be broadly bipartisan, not necessarily the day-to-day conduct or specific positions on specific points, but the general thrust should be bipartisan, or at least as bipartisan as possible.
Mm-hmm. Now, many of the guests on this progressive program criticize an economic system they say is run by people like you, a longtime Goldman Sachs executive who promotes foreign policy positions for both parties and represents the 1%. So we'll let you take the floor, and how do you plead?
Well, I think that is a perspective that doesn't take into account one fundamental point, and that is, in the job I had, which was Undersecretary, as you pointed out, for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, one of my key objectives, in fact, the one I spent the most time on, was promoting American business and American jobs abroad, which is to say, pushing exports, other government support companies that are aiming to export. That was one of the things I did along with Hillary Clinton, under the leadership of Hillary Clinton. And that requires a relationship with the business community. The business community is the major creator of jobs in the U.S., and therefore to help the business community export also boosts jobs in the United States. I also worked with the AFL-CIO and the unions, who were very, very adamant about making sure that there was a level playing field, that there was a fair playing field, so that the American workers would not be put at a disadvantage vis-a-vis workers of other countries, so that they would have, and the products they make would have the opportunity to be sold abroad on an equal basis with those of products made by workers in other parts of the world. So in order to do this, in order to boost jobs in this country, you need to increase opportunities in foreign markets. And you need to work with American companies that are actively attempting to increase their exports around the world, because to the extent they increase exports, they boost jobs at home. So you can't really alienate business. In fact, you really need to work closely with business as a partner, because this economy won't work if the government has not a supportive relationship with the business community and a supportive relationship with the labor community. And the labor community, in fact, encouraged us to support exports, and that helped them, and they understood that.
We're speaking with Robert Hormats, former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment under Hillary Clinton. He's currently Vice Chairman of the consulting firm Kissinger Associates. Why would you say you're a Democrat?
I'm a Democrat because I believe in the basic principles of the Democratic Party. I don't necessarily believe Democrats have the right position on every issue, In fact, there are some issues where I have differences with various Democratic leaders on various issues. But for the most part, I think the Democratic Party has the goal of what I would call inclusive growth, which is increasing opportunities for more and more people to get ahead economically and socially. And I believe also the Democratic Party understands the fundamental tenet in this country, that this was a country that was based on providing people with the opportunity to succeed. That means child care, that means strong education, that means when people have difficult times, providing them support to get through those difficult times. And it means a generally compassionate government, which underscores the needs of the American people, but is focused also not just on what's going on today, but trying to find ways of strengthening this country for the future. Our founding fathers talked about building a country for themselves and their posterity. I think the posterity point is too frequently lost, and I think the Democratic Party has a sense that what you do today is very important, not just for people in the current political or social environment, but for building a stronger country down the road. And that requires investing in people, giving people opportunities for jobs, giving people opportunities to get through difficult times so they can better their lives.
Now, you've been in and around government since the late 60s. What can we learn from the foreign policy successes and failures since then? For instance, shouldn't the Vietnam experience have informed the policy toward Iraq? Shouldn't we avoid involvement in places where the people hate us?
Well, I think Iraq's a very interesting case. I do think that you really need to understand before you go into a situation where you place American forces in harm's way or you intervene in other parts of the world, you really need to understand what you're doing and understand all the implications of doing it. And I think that in the cases where we have gotten involved that have turned out badly, we have really not given enough thought to why we were going in and what the outcome was likely to be under various scenarios. We didn't really think it through, and we didn't really understand the societies, the people we were dealing with well enough. I think Iraq was a problem in part because we went in thinking that we would be able to create this idyllic society, or at least a much more democratized society. We really didn't understand the culture of the people, the history of the people, and we went in and we made enormous mistakes. They were mistakes of poor planning, of I think a lack of understanding of what we were doing. I think Iraq turned out to be an enormous mistake. I also think that the problem frequently is that when governments go in, and before they go in, they do not have enough of a discussion with the American people about the implications of what they're doing, so people understand all facets of it. The Iraq War, in my judgment, was an enormous mistake for which we're paying the price today. And it was a mistake in part because not just so much the war itself, but really how we dealt with a lot of the problems in Iraq after the war. And I think had the American people understood better the situation in Iraq, there would have been much less public support for it, and I think the government would not have made the decision to go in. But I think there was a lot of emotion at that point, and there was a linkage of Iraq to 9/11, which turned out not to be the case, and there were arguments that it had weapons of mass destruction. It turned out that the people who looked for them couldn't find them. So there were a lot of mistakes in not conveying information accurately to the American people, mistakes in judgment about what to do after the war to bring this to a constructive conclusion. And I think the war itself turned out to be a mistake, and we're still paying the price for it. Americans paid the price during the time. A lot of lives were lost. It cost a lot of money that could have been used for other things, and it changed the Middle East in ways that probably have made us more vulnerable and created greater dangers than before.
You mentioned the understanding. Obviously, Iraq started under a different administration, continued under the current administration. Are we any better at understanding that where we are with Iraq? I mean, is it? I feel like we're treading in mud and we're not really moving anywhere on it after this long period of time. Do you feel the same way?
I think we have a lot of problems still in Iraq that are with us today in terms of ISIS, for instance. The situation in Iraq has been made worse by the fact that the government of Iraq was not able to become a unity government, that the government in Iraq had a very strong Shiite leadership, which did not include, and in fact, which alienated a large number of Sunnis and never was able to work with the Kurds. The real question now is whether this new government is going to be able to create a unity government in Iraq which pulls all the various factions together. Mm-hmm. And that is something the administration is working toward. But Iraq, under the Ottomans, was really three separate areas: a Sunni area, a largely Shiite area, and the Kurdish area. And pulling all those together is going to be very difficult. We sort of assumed when we went in that you would create a government which was very inclusive. That never happened. We also undermined the stability by not at least maintaining the kind of municipal services and military and police forces that could have held society together and prevented all the fragmentation that occurred afterwards. But Iraq is a very different country from the one we thought it was when we went into the war, and it's not going to change very much. And I think a weaker Iraq opened the opportunity to ISIS, although ISIS could have emerged anyway. I don't blame our policy for the creation of ISIS, but I think it created a vacuum in Iraq, largely because of the poor performance of the Iraqi government that gave ISIS an opportunity. And of course, it strengthened Iran. Iraq was sort of a counterweight, or Saddam at least was a counterweight to Iran. So Iran became stronger as a result. Not to say Saddam was a good guy, he obviously was a very evil person, but the consequences of the removal of the government, not just Saddam, but of that government, gave opportunities for Iran that it never had before.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Robert Hormats, former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, currently Vice Chairman of the consulting firm Kissinger Associates. You were a top trade and economic advisor to Hillary Clinton at the State Department, as I just mentioned. What do you think her legacy will be as Secretary of State?
I think Hillary Clinton was a great Secretary of State for a variety of reasons. She was able to understand and implement a policy that recognized that when you develop and execute foreign policy, you need to work not just with the leaders of the country, but you have to have an understanding of the views of the people of those countries, because those people, even in countries that are not democracies, affect the positions of the nation's leadership around the world. And she was able to understand this and go around the world and really explain America's position to people, to women, to various groups in society, disadvantaged groups, to business groups. She met with business groups very regularly. So Hillary Clinton understood that modern-day diplomacy is not just about dealing with the country's president or its prime minister or its foreign minister. It's about having a policy that goes deeper than that and interacts with the people of these countries. And I think that was very important in strengthening America's image around the world. The second thing she did was she recognized and implemented a policy which placed a lot of emphasis on the rise of Asia. I went with her on numerous trips where she went to virtually every country in Asia several times, and she was superb at understanding the developments in the region and why the United States had to play a stronger role in that region, and was very effective in doing it. Third, the rising role of Africa. America had paid very little attention to Africa, although I think George Bush II was very good on doing certain things, particularly his AIDS program in Africa was a very effective program and a legacy which he can be proud of. Hillary Clinton understood that and actually worked with that program, but also helped to develop other programs that would strengthen American ties with a rising Africa and bring us closer to Africa. These were important examples, and I would touch on another one that I mentioned earlier. She was by far the most active and effective Secretary of State in our history in supporting the American economy, supporting jobs in the United States by supporting American exports abroad and pushing very hard for other countries to follow the international rules of trade to make sure that the U.S. had a level playing field on which to operate when its companies sought to sell abroad, and that American workers were not competing against subsidized companies around the world, which would put them at a competitive disadvantage. So a lot of workers, a lot of jobs in the United States were supported by Hillary Clinton's international economic diplomacy.
And you may have just answered this with the answer to that previous question, but what kind of president do you think she will make if she runs and wins?
I think Hillary Clinton would be a superb president. Having worked with her a great deal and seen her virtually every day or every other day for 4 years, I saw in Hillary Clinton a person who has enormous leadership skills. She is able to identify major problems and forge policies that address those problems. She's extremely good at managing people. She put together a team of people in the State Department that worked together very closely, worked with her very closely under her guidance, that were very effective in working with her to plan policy and strategy, but also to implement it very effectively. I think she also understands the importance of a strong America, of American strength abroad, but she also understands that you need to work with Americans at home because America's strength abroad depends on the strength of American society and the prosperity of America at home. You can't really have a sustained, effective foreign policy or national security policy abroad without a rapidly growing economy, an economy which includes more and more people, so you have a strong economic base at home, and you have a strong society at home, which means people feel that they're part of the society, that they have opportunities here, that they are able to get a good education for their children, that they have good health care. Franklin Roosevelt, during World War II, always made the point, particularly when he was developing domestic programs, that it's very important that when American soldiers go abroad, they understand what they're fighting for, and they are fighting for an America that provides them and their families with opportunities, with rights, with the chance to succeed. So to have a strong policy abroad, you need to address domestic issues at home in a constructive way. But by the same token, because so much of what happens in the United States today, particularly from an economic point of view, depends on stability abroad, on prosperity abroad, you need to work with other countries. If we don't have a good relationship with Europe, with countries in Asia like Japan and China and others, with our neighbors in Mexico and Canada and Latin America, if we don't have those good relationships, then we have vulnerabilities that create risks for Americans and undermine American prosperity. And I think she understands that's particularly true in the Middle East, where it's very important that the United States deal with these security threats in a firm way, because if you don't deal with insecurity, if you don't deal with these radical groups in the Middle East, then they could ultimately present a threat to Americans around the world and at home. That's not good for our society. It creates great dangers for our society. So I think she would really understand and be a very effective president, both in addressing domestic issues and in addressing foreign policy and national security issues.
Very good. Hillary in 2016. Robert Hormats, former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, current Vice Chairman of the consulting firm Kissinger Associates, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. And Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you very much for inviting me on your show.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Time Magazine's Zeke Miller.
Zeke Miller is here from Time Magazine. He and I were together yesterday in the East Room for, Zeke, maybe the longest presidential news conference ever.
It sure felt that way. It was just 73 minutes on the clock, but those last 13 probably felt like an eternity for us.
Yeah.
And probably for the president, too.
For him, too.
And for everybody.
Yeah. How do you think overall, I mean, his message, we were all, we were all buzzing ahead of time about what word he would use to describe the evening, right?
He wouldn't give Republicans the satisfaction of picking a word.
Yeah.
It's sort of, this is the one thing, Mitch McConnell wanted to be a majority leader, but he really wanted the president to say shellacking or something like that again, some other, gerund, I don't know. Thumping, drubbing,
Yeah.
You pick it. I mean, whooping, I don't know, but the president decided he wasn't going to do that, but that also got to the point of that broader press conference, which was the president never really seemed to internalize Tuesday's results. A lot of, I'm going to stay the course. I'll listen to the Republicans, but I'm not going to change. I'm, doubling down on, whether it be the immigration announcement or sort of pushing for infrastructure spending, which, he's been doing for 6 years and really hasn't gotten anywhere on. He's not changing. And really, he was trying to walk that fine line between I hear you, voters, but I'm not kind of sort of listening in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it was sort of like you're straddling in that. Yeah, and toward the Republicans, the message was, I'm willing to work with you. I respect you. We've always had a good relationship. There are some things we can get done. At the same time, I'm not going to sit around waiting for you to act. Right. So
he's trying to accomplish a lot. It's a complicated press conference. Certainly not one he wanted to give, and he didn't want to be there. Certainly in that position, but. Yeah, the challenge was by not naming what his party's defeat was on Tuesday, by not sort of announcing whether it be a personnel change or any sort of substantive. He wasn't even engaging in sort of self-reflection or introspection. It was which was kind of odd. So he didn't offer anybody sort of a window into how he processed it.
Right. Except I thought the window might have been, and where I thought he got the closest to sort of undermining the Republican victory. And let's face it, there was a blowout for the Republican Party in state legislatures, in governors, in the House, and in the Senate, or across the board.
And they had a good night. That's the president
I
said.
love that. That's the most he said. They had a good night. He kept talking about turnout and the fact that only 1/3 of eligible voters voted. Right.
And it's like the other 2/3 of you, like, really, guys, come on.
Exactly. Like the 2/3, like, if they had voted, it would have been different, right?
Yeah, and that's unquestionably true in a whole bunch of these races. Certainly there's always going to be in that 6th year, a vote against the incumbent. But yeah, I mean, the president's just aware, Republicans are aware. If the Obama electorate that turned out in 2008 and 2012 showed up on Tuesday, it would have been a very different result in a whole bunch of these races. But I mean, that's the point is they didn't show up. They didn't feel like they had to show up. Didn't feel like they were asked to show up or had a need to be there. So, and that's as much the president's fault as anybody else's.
So, two questions, I guess. One is whether we can expect anything to get done. I mean, because we were hearing the same, even maybe more of I want to work together, I want to get things done from Mitch McConnell, right?
Exactly.
At the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. So you got basically the president, Mitch McConnell, saying we want to work together. Do you really think anything's going to change? Anything's going to get done?
I think it's likely that we'll see a bunch of small things get done. Even something like trade. That's something the president has been talking about a lot about that Senate Democrats weren't really enamored with because labor's not in particular it doesn't like some of the finer points of the trade deals currently under negotiation. So that could be a very concrete outcome of this, but. Certainly, I don't think we're in you're going to see any grand bargains of any scale. It'll be, there just won't be as many, fires that we saw over the past 2 years. No shutdowns, no crises. Mitch McConnell said that a bunch of times. He told us in an interview the other day, I'm the guy who gets us out of government shutdowns, not the guy who gets us in them. Mm-hmm. That's how McConnell sees himself. He feels like he was born to be a majority leader. He's trying to, he wants to run a steady ship because he knows that if there's a conflict, his majority is not just in doubt, but is in serious jeopardy in 2016.
In 2016. Is there going to be a bourbon summit?
What I found odd about that was the president didn't know Mitch McConnell's drinking preference. I'm assuming it's Kentucky bourbon just because he's the senator from Kentucky, and I think that's what the president was doing. But you've had 6 years with the guy. You should, I generally know what people like to drink. And the president, I'm not sure what his beverage preference is, and that sort of, was just, in a sentence, just an indication of just how far apart they are in so many things.
No, yeah, right, because when they come to the White House for these meetings, right? I mean, particularly maybe after 5 o'clock or something. I mean, they've shared
when that happens.
They've shared a drink. They must have shared a cocktail. You would think that he would have some idea of whether Mitch is a gin and tonic guy or old-fashioned guy, which we think.
I think old-fashioned is I think he told our friend Olivier Knox that
he's on record.
Yeah.
The proper way to have bourbon, but he won't choose among his children, though,
right.
Which I think is a smart political move.
Yeah.
I just want to point out, as a little aside here, that Zeke Miller is a man who does know what he likes to drink. We had a White House Correspondents' event a couple of Saturdays ago.
You're calling me out now. Wow.
And Zeke wasn't sure what they were going to be serving, so he brought his own six-pack.
Oh, wow, really?
Yes.
That's a professional move.
He did. He had his own six-pack, and he offered me one.
I was just for me. I was sharing.
Yeah, I love that.
Sharing's caring. It was a weekend day. There was a series of panels, and then followed by a little thing at the end. But we weren't sure how big the thing at the end was going to be. We weren't sure how long the panels were going to go. But that was pulling me away from football. So I was figuring I'd bring the football to.
So what kind of beer was it?
It was some sort of Oktoberfest
themed.
Right. It was also in season.
I just wanted to make sure you were going to bringing your own Bud Light or something like that.
Oh, no, it wasn't like a Bud Light or a PBR. No,
yeah, okay,
it was
all right, good.
It was a glass bottle.
Bill, when the weather's colder, I usually bring my own flask of bourbon in here that I drink during the show. So, I mean...
Now, you're the cover for Time Magazine, and I'll get out of the way, Cyprian, I don't know, sure we can pull it up here, is getting a little bit of chatter today. You've taken the old President Obama Shepherd Ferry poster, Hope, right?
Yep, and it's
go ahead.
And it's a photo of Mitch McConnell, and then change under it. So it's there's certainly been some change, and it's kind of a fun photo of Mitch McConnell, and it's a kind of a striking image because I don't think anybody would have imagined 6 months ago, seeing Mitch McConnell looking like this.
No, I would never imagine Mitch McConnell looking like this, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of it's A, striking that way, but B, sort of it gets the broader point of the story inside, which is how Mitch McConnell did this, but also the challenges his party faces going forward, and just how much of a change is this election. It's probably didn't change all of that much because we're just doing this again, in 731 days. That's 732 days.
Yeah, unbelievable. We're already into that too. When we come back, I want to talk to. So both of them talked about President Obama and Senator McConnell, their priorities yesterday, and they didn't necessarily start with the same issues that they wanted to work on. And so how does that work? How does that come together? We're visiting with Zeke Miller in studio, political reporter for Time Magazine, covering the White House for Time Magazine. So President Obama yesterday said, I want to talk about immigration reform and ISIS, money for ISIS, and Ebola, I think.
Well, he's going to do immigration reform himself, and he wanted the three things. I think it was Ebola, ISIS, and then
a budget.
And then, what to shut down.
Right. And then Mr. McConnell says, we want to work together with the president, and we want to do Keystone Pipeline.
Yeah. That's
where we're going to start. And then we're going to get rid of that medical devices tax. Right?
Which the president expressed openness to, surprisingly. That was the one surprise, is just how on that that was a real olive branch that he was extending. Hey, we can do something on the Affordable Care Act as long as it doesn't violate my principles. And it's something he said for a long time, but it was the type of thing he always said for a long time because he had to say it.
Yeah.
And now he said it, and it sounded a little bit like he meant it.
Right. And he did say he would never sign a bill to repeal it, which, by the way, they're not going to pass.
They're not going to pass anyway. They're not going to vote on it that way.
He would not sign a bill which would get rid of the individual mandate, because that's sort of the heart of the bill coming from the Mitt Romney model in Massachusetts. But he did say openness to other things, including this medical device. But as he repeated, devil's in the details.
Yeah. So I'm sure he'll find. If he doesn't want to vote for it, he'll find some way out. But it seemed like that was an interesting olive branch.
I read him on Keystone too, saying no, we're going to let the process work its way, the way it's going right now. So don't try to ram it through.
Exactly,
right?
And that's one of those weird ones where you have a whole bunch of Democratic operatives saying we don't like this thing anyway, but chances are you're going to have to bite the bullet on this and just get it out of the way now while you still give Republicans what they want. But, and it's already been delayed. The Republicans were raising hell after they delayed it after the election. So it's going to be it's coming in the next, 5-6 months when the next, review is, will be done and the president's supposed to release it. So if they want to find another way to delay it, that's going to be a lot harder to do with a Republican majority in the Senate, too.
Now, I don't think there's anybody among us reporters in that room who isn't thinking of a question they would like to ask, even if you're not going to get called in. Who knows? Lightning could strike and he might see you and call on you. So you always, He
doesn't know my name. He knows your name, but not my name.
But he still might say, "Hey, Time Magazine here," or something. Whatever. You never know. You're always thinking what you would like to ask him. What would you have asked him yesterday?
Oh, it's tough. It's hard because so many of the questions come up front. They're the obvious ones. What do you wish you would have done differently, or what does this mean for your party and your agenda? The area I thought that I wish we would have been able to drill down on with him is getting him to reflect on sort of his promise of the fever breaking, which is his line in the 2012 election. When he promised the moon in 2012 to his supporters, that things would change in Washington. That finally his agenda would, he would have the capacity to do this all now. That the only thing keeping him from getting everything he wanted in his first term was that he had to sort of deal with his own reelection. Now he had that, and then he was going to sort of be unfettered and be able to get all these things done. And then obviously that's what you do in a reelection. You make these promises, but the promise versus the reality of what's happened over the past 2 years, the prospect of what we're looking at for the next 2 years. How does he come to grips with what he told his own supporters? And because he believes it. We saw it yesterday, where he said he was sort of, I'm a little naive. I'm a little, I still believe in, there are no red states, no blue states, just the United States. These are lines from 2008 that he still comes back to, that he does believe honestly in his heart.
Yeah,
but he
ended up. I really believe. I still really believe in America.
Exactly, so I always love to hear him. I'd love to press him on how he can sort of put the two of the sort of put the really account for how the reality has not lived up to the promise.
I was waiting for somebody to ask the Bill Clinton question, and Jim Acosta from CNN came closer than anybody. Are you still relevant, sir?
Yes.
First of all, I wanted to ask, I would love to have asked that question just to see him bristle, because I think he really would have. Rightfully so.
And Jim came at him pretty hard, and he bristled at that, but I think, a little bit more direct, and you should sort of, shake the tree and see what falls.
Because the question I had was that, Mr. President, there was all these Democratic candidates who did not invite you in to campaign. Did that hurt your feelings? Did you resent it or regret it? And do you think they would have done better if they had invited you in?
Well, I mean,
he might not have gone there, but I thought it would.
I don't think he would have. I mean, Josh has been getting that question for
I know.
3-4 weeks, and it's always been, we defer to these candidates and their wisdom. Aren't you smart? Also, the whole thing of, I'm not a political, analyst. You are the head of the Democratic Party. You are one of the best politicians.
Exactly.
If not, you're the best politician of your generation.
Exactly.
One of the best this country has seen in decades. And you don't want to engage in political. Come on.
It must have, but it must have pissed him off to be forced on the sidelines.
Oh yeah, I think that was I really like campaigning. When he said that, he said that in Providence the other day. I'm like, there's a reason he's saying that. It's not just he doesn't like campaigning, but it's a little I told you so, guys.
Indeed, yeah. Well, it's going to be fun to watch, but although we're going to have a hiatus because he leaves Sunday, right, for 10 days in Asia.
Either late Saturday or early Sunday. Yep,
yeah.
He's there for. Well, some of us have to, have to wake up at like 3 a.m. to watch, a couple of press conferences.
You will. I won't. I'll tell you one thing, though. If I were President Obama, I'd want to get out of town.
I like it. Asia's a great place to go.
Any place right now. Zeke Miller, fun to work with you, and great to have you in studio today.
Thanks so much.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Celinda Lake, Robert Hormats, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For AmericasDemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate.